Hello and welcome back to the Pondering Papaya podcast. My name's Sam Cooper and we've got a little bit of a different show for you today. In the first half, I'm joined by F1 journalist Jasmine Hughes and Cameron Anderson-Jones as we preview all things Miami. And in the second half, IndyCar expert Archie O'Reilly is going to join me to discuss just what on earth has been going on in McLaren's IndyCar team. So with that bumper episode coming your way, let's get straight into it. Joining me now, as promised, is Jasmine and Cameron. First of all, huge thanks to both of you for joining us for the first time. How are you doing, Jasmine? How are you? How's all things your end?
Yeah, very good, thank you. Just got back from Monaco the other day. Was there for the Formula E, so just sort of adjusting back to reality because Monaco is just such a different world.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a little bit to start with. What was that like? What was that like as for the Formula E event? Sort of how was Monaco?
Yeah, so my first ever time visiting Monaco, and I absolutely loved it. I'm like literally counting down the days to going back. But it was a really good race. Just really interesting. Not the best weekend for McLaren, with Sam Bird getting injured in free practice, but then they had Taylor Barnard stand in, which was really exciting to watch. Really cool to see him drive. He's sort of, done a couple of stints with Formula E just with the rookie test, but this was his first race and he managed it so well. So he's definitely one to watch in the world of motorsports. Good up and coming talent, I think. But yeah, just loved Monaco. 10 out of 10.
Oh, good. That's what we like to hear. Cameron, that is a high bar to set. But
No,
have you got as good? Did you have an as exciting weekend?
I can't beat that. I'll be honest. I want to go to Monaco. That's one of the ones on my tick list. I went to the London E-Prix last year, and then now I was actually saying to someone the other day, like Monaco, that's probably the dream one. I know Berlin coming up, and actually it's quite cheap. Some people were telling me as well. If you stay in Nice, it's not actually too inaccessible at all. So. No, you've beat me at that one. I've been working on some other kind of stuff, some interviews with Arvid Lindblad that's recently gone out. So I've been busy myself as well, but not in Monaco.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I'm lucky enough to go to Monaco next month for the F1. So yeah, very much looking forward to that. But before we get there, we've got two races to go. So we'll start with Miami first, obviously, because presumably that's what you're here for, a preview. Miami Grand Prix. It's the third time we've had it, obviously, since it got added into the schedule. Official title is the Miami International Autodrome, but I think everyone sort of knows it as the track that's around the NFL stadium because that's probably the more recognizable bit. It's 5.412 kilometers long, 57 laps usually, and obviously, as I mentioned, first race in 2022. 3 DRS zones, including one incredibly long straight on the back. Sort of, we've gone from China where there was a long straight at the back to Miami now where there's also a long straight at the back. A little bit of a recap of how McLaren did last year, and I was just saying before we start recording, I forgot just how bad it was. I must have blocked this out of my memory, but it was an absolute terrible race for McLaren for both drivers. So Lando started P16, got a bit of a shunt going into turn 1, ended P17. Oscar had a brake-by-wire system issue, started P19, ended P19. So this was very much before McLaren's revival. Anyway, let's move past that. Let's sort of focus on some positive because no one wants to dwell on an absolute terrible race like it was last year. I'm going to ask you first, Jasmine. There's a lot of talk about upgrades coming into this race for McLaren. And if people listening don't know, we tend to see the first big upgrade package come when the European season starts. So that would obviously be Imola next, but McLaren and I think Mercedes also maybe sort of shooting for Miami instead. Obviously, it's hard to tell exactly what this upgrade package is going to be because we don't work in McLaren. But how big do you think this upgrade package could be to their season? And do you think it could be the kind of thing that really shoves them up sort of near where Ferrari and Red Bull are?
I think that's quite possible because I think they've already kind of embarked on such an upwards trajectory already, and that's without any major upgrade packages. So I think that they're bringing this here. I think not only it shows a bit of confidence as well because it's quite interesting to bring it on a sprint weekend when you don't have all the free practice sessions that you would get with any other race weekend. I think this could give them a good push closer to Red Bull and especially closer to Ferrari because I'd say they're currently still maybe third fastest car, but kind of gave Ferrari a bit of a run for its money in China. So I think this could be quite exciting.
And what about you, Cameron? Is that sort of a similar opinion for you?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that they're saying, and they've come out quite a few times and said, we are bringing upgrades for this race. Whenever they've said that they're bringing upgrades, these upgrades haven't just been really small things, they have been large upgrades overall. It's not going to be as big as the upgrades that came in like Austria last year. They've already said that. But at the same time, it makes you think that they are obviously going to play down these upgrades. They're not going to say, oh, yeah, we're going to beat Red Bull, are they? And then they don't beat Red Bull. They're going to play them down, and then let's just see how the weekend goes. Like you said, Mercedes might have some upgrades as well, but Ferrari and Red Bull don't. So they're just going to stay where they are. And McLaren are going to be probably the team to improve. Miami's probably not a track that would suit them, but we said that at China, and well, look what they did at China as well. Norris was incredible, and then we say that Melbourne maybe would have suited them a bit more, and they weren't as good as we expected. So it's a little bit weird with McLaren right now. I feel like whenever you expect them to do well, they don't, and when you don't expect them to do well, they do really well. So it'll be an interesting one. It'll still be good to see how Oscar does as well. Lando's been doing really well recently, but I still think Oscar maybe struggles a little bit on tyre degradation. But there's loads of things that are coming into this weekend to keep you excited. And whenever I think of Miami or any kind of of these races now, I just still keep on thinking of that Sergio Perez meme. And it's just like in the back of my mind where that guy was like, Sergio Perez! And everyone was just like, I absolutely love it. And that's the main thing that I think about on any of these American races now.
Mine's always do you remember Craig Slater? I think it was the first year it came out when he was fake swimming in the marina. That is just burned into my
Yes.
memory. I don't know if the marina still exists.
It's more than an F1 race, this race.
Yeah.
It's one for the celebs as well.
Oh yeah, if you're a fan of especially Martin Brundle's grid walk beforehand, there's going to be a lot of celebrities there. There was last year. There will be again this year. Jasmine, you sort of mentioned a little bit there of sort of perhaps the difficulties of this circuit. Like, let's just go into that a little bit more because, like you mentioned, it's a sprint weekend, so I'm sure people are familiar. But that just means the one practice session on basically the first session of the weekend. But also, it's a street circuit, isn't it? I say street; it's more like a car park circuit. But the barriers are quite close. Like that's what I'm trying to get at. Like, there is a possibility of a crash. Do you think it's too much of a risk to to put all these new upgrades on when you've got such limited time and a track that could have a crash?
I think they're definitely taking a big risk, that's for sure. Whether it's too much of a risk, I guess it's quite hard to say because if it does all play out well, then it was a risk worth taking, you know. It does surprise me that they're not bringing it to a race like Imola because that does usually seem to be the place that people like to bring forth their upgrades. But then I guess it does give them an edge. If this works out well for them, then they can head to the European stint knowing that what they've got works nicely. And if it doesn't play out too well or as they expected, then they've got a good like a week or two to kind of work on that and then head into the European stint even more confident with what they're bringing.
Yeah, you're right, 100%. Like you said, I think that's a really, really good point you made. That it's probably a sign of confidence that McLaren feel comfortable to bring something like this to a new circuit. Cameron, sort of when we look at the contenders for this race, I mean, we touched on it a little bit, but do you still think that it's going to be Red Bull in particular? Because I'm looking at the past few years, and Max in particular has been utterly dominant here. He's won. I'm going to say he's won every race that's raced there. There's only been 2, but it still makes sense. But last year in particular, he was just unbelievable. He blitzed past Perez. Do you think we're going to go into a situation where McLaren are probably going to be fighting for Ferrari for those podium spots rather than with Red Bull up front?
I still think if anyone's putting money on it, they're looking at Max. Like, why would you not put your money on Max? When I look at the circuit, I think it's not really a circuit that is going to suit McLaren. They're always probably the slowest in the speed traps, and you've got 2 gigantic straights. They are very good in high speed. Everybody knows that, but that's only the first sector really. And then you go into the really like twisty section, which direction change at low speed isn't really their forte as of such. And I think they've been quite public in saying that Lando said a few times, if we can improve the low speed, then we will have a great car. But that's where they're kind of lacking. So I don't know, if you said to me that they brought these upgrades at Qatar or some track that I thought really, really did suit the car, then I'd be like, well, I think that they can win the race. I think they can at least battle Max. It's hard to see Lando maybe fighting for the win, but at the moment, we were saying earlier about McLaren being second or third quickest. It is kind of that yo-yo effect. You don't really know it. One weekend they're second, the next weekend they're third. They are definitely in there with Ferrari. It's not as clear as Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren, because China exactly showed that. There are lots of things saying that Ferrari couldn't get their tyre temperatures up. Like, I don't know how much to sometimes believe some of these things. There's always excuses when you don't do well. But McLaren should be hopeful. They're bringing these upgrades, like you've already said. Let's see how they do, because they could. I think as well, it shows a lot of confidence that they've got in the two drivers. They aren't drivers that are normally, I hope I don't jinx it now, they normally don't go and put it in the wall in FP1. These are drivers that will kind of work into the weekend, and normally you'll see Lando bring his best when it comes to qualifying, etc. So let's see. Let's hope there's nothing. Let's hope there's a chassis if we need it. And yeah, let's go for it, I suppose.
Yeah, I think even Williams have now got the extra chassis, so everyone related to Williams is probably breathing a huge sigh of relief. They don't have to worry about having one car left over. Jasmine, I'm going to ask you a hard question. So, like I mentioned, we've said that McLaren and Mercedes are bringing upgrades of quite substantial. We haven't got the full details just yet, but of the two teams, which one do you trust to get it right? And I'm saying this because obviously Mercedes had a huge history of pretty much doing everything right for about 10 years, but since then it's been the complete opposite. What about what do you think? Who's going to have the better package this weekend?
It's strange because I think a couple of years ago I would have 100% said Mercedes, but nowadays I don't feel like I have a lot of trust in them, a lot of faith in them to kind of get things right. They just strike me as a team that feel a little bit confused by their own actions, and it's like they do something and then they kind of head in the right direction and then suddenly it all unravels and actually they've done a complete left turn and it's all gone wrong. Whereas McLaren, every time they seem to be, kind of bringing an upgrade, or more or less every time, it does seem to kind of play out the way that they'd expected. It seems just like a team that's kind of steadily, cementing their place as quite a strong contender, especially, obviously not on the same level as kind of Red Bull are, but in the top 2-3 teams. Whereas Mercedes, it just feels like there's a lot of fluctuation. One moment they'll be, doing better than before, and then the next they've just suddenly dipped again. So my money's on McLaren to kind of get it right this weekend.
Mm-hmm. And Cameron, thinking about the season in general, like going ahead, I mean, rather than looking back, over the course of the next few races, next few months, whatever, do you think McLaren are going to be in a battle more with Ferrari or Mercedes? Like, who do you think is going to develop better? I mean, Jasmine just touched on it a bit there that McLaren have been the ones to do that better. But do you think Mercedes are going to find? I mean, it's a hard question, but are Mercedes going to get it right at some point, or are we going to have another year of them being well behind?
I think that Mercedes will get it right at some point, but that's just me saying it because of what I've just witnessed for the last 10 plus years. Like, I don't know, every time I've come into a season and I've seen Sebastian Vettel do really well at Ferrari, and I think, Mercedes, do they have an answer for that? They turn up in Australia and then they were like, I can remember that year vividly, they were like wiping the smirk off their faces as of such. Like, they were like, yeah, we've got this. Obviously 2026 would be a good time for them to sort everything out. But looking into this season, it's going to be tough for Mercedes to get a single win. I think, just like Jasmine said, there's a lot of people in Mercedes who are like sticking or twisting at the moment. At McLaren, you've got Lando, Oscar, Zach, who are all locked in. They've committed. They've said, we're going to stay here. They've got Lewis, who's obviously leaving. We don't know if potentially Max could end up at Mercedes. George is then the figurehead. He's still very young to be a figurehead as well. And for Lewis, how much does he want to upgrade this car? That sounds really stupid. But as much information as he gives them, next year he's not going to be with the team. So it is a really awkward situation, which is why when he actually came out with that statement, I thought it was a bit of an odd timing. But yeah, I think McLaren can be positive. I don't think they should be looking backwards at all. Like, don't look over your back to see if Mercedes are coming, because I think probably by the time Mercedes are as quick as Ferrari and McLaren, it will be too late. So we don't know. But when you look at tracks at like Silverstone, so if there's a year to go to Silverstone, this seems to be the year if you're a McLaren fan, because it's a track that suits them very well. And this car keeps on coming leaps and bounds. And I think, I'm not 100% sure, but I saw something that Ferrari were maybe going to bring upgrades in Imola, was potentially the first place that they were planning to do it. So for them to bring it a week before, obviously to get the edge over Ferrari, and then let's see what Ferrari's upgrades are like the following week.
Yeah, just on those Ferrari, because I think someone in the team, I can't remember if it was Fred Vasseur, but they described it as a bit of a game changer. So obviously that does sound like it's substantial.
Yeah, I heard it was like quite a big thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that probably makes more sense for them because obviously it's not their home race because obviously that's Monza, but obviously it's in Italy. So they're going to want to show some kind of improvement for the home fans. Let's just, before we look at the other teams, let's have a quick little look back on the season so far. Because obviously after Miami, we're into sort of the proper European stretch. I know that Canada's sort of shoehorned in there, but largely it's the European run from now on. Just a little rundown of where McLaren are. So P3 in the constructors, which is obviously much better than they were this time last year, on 96 points. And then if I just have a quick look at the drivers. So yeah, Lando Norris in 5th, Oscar Piastri in 6th. Jasmine, what have you made of McLaren's season in a whole so far from the 5 races that we've seen?
I think pleasantly surprised. I think it's been genuinely a really good start to the season. 2 podiums. Lando had the sprint pole. Like it kind of feels a bit more like what more could you ask for? Obviously a race win, I guess, but as it goes, pretty good. We're only a few races in, and the season is still young, but I think that the team can be pretty happy with what they've done, and I think it's really promising for the rest of the season that if this is where they are now, then where might they be at the end of the season if they keep building on this and bring this momentum forwards each race weekend? Then they could see themselves in quite a good position.
And yeah, going into this season, Cameron, do you think that P3 would have been sort of what McLaren were aiming for, or do you think they've even outperformed their own expectations?
Well, I think if you look back 12 months ago, they would have been, well, where were they 12 months ago? Everyone turned up at Bahrain and they were, I don't know, can't remember off the top of my head, but it was like 16th or something. Mm-hmm. For any McLaren fan to see this, after Austria, after Silverstone, it's always been one step further. Can we get on the podium? Can we get on that race win? And that is the thing that's going to come next, a race win. It seems like a matter of when, not if, with McLaren. So I think they would be happy with third. But to beat Mercedes and to beat Ferrari would be, it would be a monumental thing to do. I don't think anybody would have guessed that at the start of the season. But if they can beat one of them, and Mercedes potentially having another off year, they aren't probably in the same area as Ferrari, as Mercedes, as Red Bull, but they are overachieving, I would say, at the moment. But it's a team that's got to go back to the front at some point. Let's see how it all unravels, because we never know. 2026, we'll get onto the news later, but if Adrian Newey's not with the team, how much of an impact does that have on Red Bull? Could they then drop back? Is Ferrari the team that's going to come forward? Where do McLaren come in that whole pecking order? We literally don't know. Everything is scrapped yet again. But McLaren will be over the moon, I would say. The only thing for me is like there's been a few opportunities where they could have probably capitalised more. And I know a lot of people sometimes say about like it just doesn't seem to happen for Lando when he has something, I'm going to say, like in his hands. Kind of, like he could have won the China sprint race, in my opinion. But if he just didn't get a good start, was that the practice procedure? Was that just him maybe a little bit nervous? I don't know, because every time he gets into a situation where he could be on pole or he could win a race, it just doesn't materialise for me.
Let's move on to the rest of the grid then. Sort of, we're recording this on the day that Adrian Newey's finally made his big news known. I think this was a rumour that first came out in German media. I think that was sort of where it came out from, which I'm not really sure what the source on that was, but clearly someone was well informed. So basically Adrian Newey leaving Red Bull after, I think, it'll be 19 years by the time he leaves. He's leaving in the first quarter of 2025. So effectively, he's serving his gardening leave now. He's got a year's gardening leave. This is something that we've seen a lot. And even with McLaren, obviously, because Rob Marshall came from Red Bull, he had to wait a long time. David Sanchez, who obviously came from Ferrari, no longer at McLaren, but we've spoken about that before. Jasmine, just first of all, your reaction to the Newey news. I mean, we can talk about what this means to the rest of the grid, but I was still shocked, even after a few days of rumours. It was still quite a big surprise that he was ever going to go, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was surprised as well, because I'd sort of just resigned myself to the idea that he was just going to retire with Red Bull. He was just, he seemed happy there. But then everything happened and all these rumours started coming out, and it started like that as a rumour, but then gradually it actually seemed like there was more and more truth behind it. I'm quite excited to see what he's going to do. Obviously, we still don't know whether he's going to retire or whether he's going to join a different team. There's not really been any clarity on that. I think Red Bull said that he's still going to work on the hypercar project that that he's taking a step back from like F1 duties. So whether he's taking a step back from Formula One completely, I don't know. But I think it would be really cool if he does join another team. I think Ferrari's a great possibility for him. You know, he said he wanted to work with Ferrari, and he said he wants to work with Lewis. And you know, two birds, one stone. Like now is the golden opportunity. So it's just very exciting. But it's still like a bit of shock. I haven't really kind of actually fully come to grips with the fact that he's not going to be at Red Bull. It's been forever that he's been there. So yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's definitely a change. I mean, obviously, like we're so used to seeing him in the paddock with obviously that red notebook. I mean, it must be so intimidating when you see him walking up and down the grid. And he's like, "Oh God, he's looking at my car. I've done this. Like he's judging me." But yeah, so I think the way it's going to work is, and I'm sort of reading between the lines of the press release, but it sounds like you're right that he's going to completely stop F1 now and just work on the hypercar. So if you didn't know, the hypercar is a project that he's been really putting a lot of focus into the last few years. It's called the RB17. It's called that because there was no F1 car called RB17 due to COVID. But it's obviously not the first hypercar that Newey's ever done. He did the Valkyrie for Aston Martin before Aston Martin were an F1 team. So clearly he loves doing that kind of stuff. And I think it's very clear he likes designing all kind of things. I think there was even a story recently he was designing a submarine. So I don't know who paid him or why he's designed a submarine, but it's gonna be the quickest submarine around. I tell you, if you ever see that in the ocean,
fastest submarine.
yeah, it's going flying by you with Max driving it probably. But Karen, what about you? Like, where do you see him next year? I mean, there's been a load of talk about Ferrari, and obviously Jasmine mentioned that it's sort of, if you look through Newey's career, and obviously he's been to Williams, he's been to McLaren, he's pretty much helped build Red Bull from the ground up. But that Ferrari's never been there. He's always sort of said no to the opportunity. And I think Ferrari have been very open and said that they've offered it multiple times. And it's always been he doesn't want to move to Maranello as pretty much the main reason why he doesn't want to go. He wants to stay in the UK. But it's looking now more likely than ever. Do you think that's where he's going to end up at some point?
I don't really know what to think of it because all the time that I see these remarks, I don't know what to make of it. It's just so confusing. I can't keep up with the whole story myself. It's like I've seen things that he's not got gardening leave, but then they've negotiated that outside of his contract. It is really confusing, like you say. I think Ferrari probably is the team that. Can you imagine that? Like genuinely, Adrian Newey, Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc. That's a crazy team. Like that's a team that would probably break the internet. I'm not going to say records because I don't think that they'll all be there long enough. But if that team was around like a couple of years ago, that's a serious statement. And Adrian Newey is as valuable as Lewis Hamilton, as Max Verstappen. If you don't have the car to fight at the front, then what does it mean for the driver? Max wouldn't have these world championships if he didn't have probably Adrian Newey making the car for him. People don't understand, I think, how big this is. Like he should be on a lot more money than he even is. And for me as well, I find it quite interesting that obviously Mercedes and Aston Martin are going. I think at the start I kind of saw the Aston Martin links and kind of believed them a little bit, but I just genuinely don't see it. I'm kind of interested. I think he'll go to Ferrari, but if Mercedes were to say and give everything to Adrian Newey that he wanted, and also Max said before that he wants everything to stay the same at Red Bull for him to stay. So that included Christian, Adrian, and Dr. Helmut Marko. So links coming out today that potentially the Mercedes are preparing a 124 million contract. So if Mercedes can get Max Verstappen and Adrian Newey, is that more likely for Adrian to go? Or does he want to go to Ferrari? Because that's the decision that's basically got to be made. If Mercedes can get Max, then I kind of think Adrian, if their relationship is good, we don't know that. I'm assuming it is. He's won this many championships. Why would they not go together maybe? I think it's either Mercedes or Ferrari. Which way do you want to go? And it's a huge loss for Red Bull. And I don't really know where they go from here because next year, it's just a whole reset and they don't have him working on the car. I can imagine he's already probably put quite a few ideas together. They would have been working on this for a long time, but he's not going to be, he's literally just kind of walked out the building and said, yeah, that's me, put my stuff down, I'm gone. So all of the things that they've just been they've been helping them with stuff like 2 weeks ago and he's midway through doing something and he's just gone. And they're like, where do I go from here?
That'd be amazing if he's like in the mid email chain and suddenly like, well, am I ever getting a reply to this
Out of
now? No.
office.
Yeah, what? Jasmine, let's talk about what happens to Red Bull then, because Cameron's touched on it a little bit there. Like, it is a big time, obviously, for them, and I think over the last few years, Horner in particular, is sort of trying to make it seem that it's not all just Newey, like, isn't he? He's been saying that Pierre Wache, who's obviously, I can't remember his official title, but he's very high up in the technical team. It's sort of saying that he's also there. Like, how do you? I mean, it's hard to predict, but how do you see Red Bull going a few years after Newey? Because like you mentioned earlier, like he's been there pretty much since the start, and it's been a long time since Red Bull have been without him. So, do you think they continue winning titles, or do you think it's going to be sort of a step down for them?
I think it's going to be a really interesting time for the team, and possibly not in a good way. I think I could see them taking a slight step down, because it's not just sort of the actual physical influence of Adrian Newey, but just his presence within the team. And then you don't know what other impact that might have. Who else might leave because Adrian Newey's left, and whether Horner will stay, whether this could impact Horner's position within the team, whether it impacts Max and Dr. Helmut Marko staying. We don't really know. So I think that the team's going to kind of enter this period of a bit of uncertainty. But I don't doubt that there are still, absolutely insanely talented, intelligent people at the team that will do their best to carry on what Adrian Newey has done so far. And I'm sure they've been learning alongside him for so long now. But whether they'll have the same impact that someone of Newey's, capabilities has had kind of remains to be seen. I'm sure there's probably a lot of very nervous people at Red Bull at the moment. I think that's they probably are not having the best Wednesday morning, that's for sure.
Best year. You could stretch it to the whole year, can you? Like, what a time to be part of that team. Like, inside of the office must be a fascinating thing. For anyone listening, I've got bad news that he's not going to be joining McLaren. Zach Brown was already said, I think he said this to the BBC, that they've basically got a plan in place. And while he I think he did describe Adrian Newey as the most successful designer of all time. Can't really argue with that, obviously, but he said he's not coming to McLaren anytime soon. So we can rule out McLaren, that he's not going to be making a sensational return, 20 odd years after he left. Let's end the podcast today then, sort of with our predictions for Miami, going back to the two drivers. So let's start with Oscar. Why not? We tend to start with Lando, so let's switch it up for a bit. Let's start with Oscar. Cameron, sort of where do you think he might finish this year? This race, like where on the podium maybe, or sort of whereabouts are you predicting?
I think a podium. I would always be very, very impressed if Oscar got a podium. At the moment, I still think he's settling in, and it is obviously his second season, so he's no longer a rookie. So I'm interested to see the step up he makes this season, because last year was incredible, but I still think when it comes to like tyre wear and sometimes like a little bit of consistency, but he's always there to capitalise when Lando doesn't have a good weekend, which is obviously really, really good. But I think maybe raw pace, Lando at the moment is a little bit ahead. So if I'm going to say that Oscar's going to get a podium, it would be that Lando and probably, Perez has got to have some kind of issue or something. I think still for him, like top 5 would be a really good result and something that he can build on. Lando, I would be looking at the podium, but that being said, Miami, like we've said already, isn't probably their favourite track. So it will be interesting. I do think that Ferrari will kind of step up a little bit this weekend with kind of the upgrades coming as well. But it's interesting that I think after Melbourne, I think Ferrari have taken kind of a step back in quality and the race, each race kind of. So it's interesting. I still think obviously Max will be there. And then Lando, I'm hoping for a podium, but let's not get too carried away. I know these upgrades have come, but like we've already said, for them to actually understand them and put them to good use is going to be very hard just in one session.
Mm-hmm. And Jasmine, what about you? What do you think for McLaren this weekend?
Yeah, I agree with Cameron. I think that definitely Oscar's doing well, but still things that he's learning. I think a top 5 is possible, or maybe just ever so slightly outside the top 5 for Oscar, maybe a P6. But I think Lando could definitely be looking at the podium. Probably not the top step. I reckon that's probably going to go to Max, and I wouldn't be surprised by a Red Bull 1-2. But I think it would probably be between Lando and one of the Ferraris for that third step on the podium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Fascinating. And yeah, thanks again for both of you joining. We're going to be back on Monday, obviously not Sunday, because it's a very late race for us in the UK. I mean, we're going to be up well past our bedtimes. But yeah, Huge thanks to both of you once again for joining. I'm sure we'll get you on later in the season. But yeah, thanks for joining.
Cheers, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So that's all for part 1 and the focus on the Miami Grand Prix. But stay tuned, because after this break, I'm going to be speaking to IndyCar journalist Archie O'Reilly to give you a full rundown on just what on earth has happened at McLaren's IndyCar team this week. Joining me now is Archie, and like I said, he's here to give us the full rundown. He's an IndyCar journalist, which is much more than I know about the sport. But while we tend to focus on F1, of course, McLaren have got a huge amount of racing teams, and a lot has been going on in IndyCar, not just with McLaren, but we shall stick to the McLaren team. First of all, Archie, huge thanks to you for joining me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me on.
No worries at all. Yeah, I think you'd be the absolute perfect man to sort of describe what's happening. So I'm going to give a very brief overview, and probably you can put some more meat on the bones, really. But essentially what's happened is David Malukas, if I'm getting his right, tricky name, David Malukas is being let go from McLaren after sustaining a hand injury. And that's basically all I'm going to say. I'm going to hand over to you. If you can give us the full explanation of how we got here, how this came to be, and sort of why they've made the decision.
Yeah, so I guess it's the right place to start is how we got there in the first place, because initially, McLaren run 3 cars in IndyCar. It looked like Alex Palou was kind of bound to replace Felix Rosenqvist in what is their number 6 car. He had a McLaren deal that kind of involved F1 testing. He was their F1 reserve driver. And he basically decided not to honour the IndyCar prospects he had to join McLaren in 2024, as it is. And I presume that's because he saw no F1 opening, decided, you know what, I'll stay at Chip Ganassi Racing, where, you know, at the time he was in the process of winning the championship, his second in 3 years. Why would he leave that team? And it kind of just made sense from Palou's side that he didn't want to leave where he was having a lot of success. McLaren weren't happy there. There was legal trouble. We won't get into that because that's quite complicated. But they had a decision to make then with who they put in that number 6 car. And, you know, Rosenqvist by this stage kind of, you know, he wouldn't have felt wanted at the team because they were talking about replacing him. It looked like 2020 F2 vice champion Callum Ilott, who a lot of people from the F1 side might know, he may be an option, but he was locked in with Juncos Hollinger Racing, who were his team at the time. That relationship later broke down. They separated. Ilott became free. But at that point, you know, you kind of have to get your business done early. And Malukas had an impressive few years at Dale Coyne Racing, who are one of the smaller teams in IndyCar. He'd sort of graduated to IndyCar through the Road to Indy, which is their kind of feeder series system. He'd finished 16th, 17th in the championship, which is pretty good going for your first 2 years. He got a couple of podiums, one in each of the 2 years. But he was a kind of a bit of an unknown quantity, really. You know, there was a lot of promise. McLaren took a risk on him, and, you know, it was kind of the case he was the best option for them at the time. That was kind of out there, free, a bit unproven. He you know, not necessarily been the most consistent, partly down to not being one of the sort of leading teams in IndyCar. But that was announced, I think it was on the last weekend of last season. But then fast forward to February this year, and it kind of all started to go downhill. He had a mountain biking accident on, I think it was the 11th of February. He had surgery a couple of days later. And then from when he had his stitches removed, which was, I think it was on the 22nd of Feb, maybe, there was a 6-week time frame given for his recovery, which meant he would basically miss the first points race of the season. And then there was a 6-week gap until the next points race. But IndyCar have tried this exhibition sort of event, so he missed that as well. And then it was kind of hoped that, you know, he'd be fine after that, but it kind of turned out, you know, he wasn't okay. Long Beach, which happened in the last couple of weeks, he wasn't free for that. He was still recovering. That was the second points race of the season. And then after that, only then he had, I don't know the intricacies of his recovery, but his pins removed from the surgery he'd have, which was supposed to be quite a bit before, which meant he then missed the third points race of the season. And McLaren they've had to sort of go between a couple of drivers. They used Ilott for the first race and then the exhibition race, but he's in the World Endurance Championship this year, so he wasn't free for then the next 2 rounds. So they put Théo Pourchaire in the car, another one who a lot of F1 fans will know, reigning F2 champion, of course. He's doing Super Formula this year, but he was available. There weren't any clashes, so both of them did quite respectably. And you can imagine the anguish for Malukas just watching on the sideline, seeing other people in his car. And it seemed like he was still kind of under the illusion that he was part of the picture. He tweeted, I think it was on Saturday or Sunday last weekend, like genuinely a day before it came out that the team had released him, saying, well, there might be an outside chance that I'm recovered in time for the next race. It's unlikely. Yeah, then came McLaren's statement. I woke up to seeing that he'd blacked out all his social medias, which was kind of an early hint. And yeah, it's crushing for Malukas then that the team have opted not to continue with him. I really hope he gets the support he needs, whether from McLaren or whoever else. And like on the team side, it's an understandable decision. The uncertainty for them isn't helpful, not knowing when Malukas is going to be recovered. I think there's break clauses in contracts, after missing X amount of races, this is able to happen without any trouble legally or what have you. Sponsors as well, that's a big thing in motorsport, in IndyCar. They want continuity as well as the team really wanting some rhythm. And just going race by race, it wasn't sustainable for them. They just had no idea when Malukas could be fit. And yeah, I just hope he was prepared for the possibility, because it's really cruel, and it's even worse kind of if it's a surprise for him. So yeah, there's the quite in-depth story of kind of Malukas at McLaren. And unfortunately, it comes to an end without even racing.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thanks so much for that. And first of all, you got to say, all drivers have got to stay away from bikes. I think that's my first takeaway. We've seen Fernando Alonso had an injury. Lance Stroll last year also got injured on a bike accident. So if you're a racing driver of any kind, stay away from bikes would be my main advice. Let's sort of look at what it means to the future then. Like, we'll start with McLaren first. Like, you obviously mentioned like Théo Pourchaire's how it goes so far. And obviously, he's not a driver who's got an obvious route into F1. It's looking quite busy, and his team obviously moving to Audi in a few years' time. Do you think he's going to be the one that sort of fills in on a permanent basis now, or is it too hard to tell?
We don't know yet. I think Ilott and Pourchaire are the two, really. As I said, they both did pretty good jobs when they filled in. Pourchaire, in particular, on debut at Long Beach, which is a tight, bumpy street circuit. Pourchaire's had success at Monaco in F2, but street circuits over in America are pretty different. They're quite bumpy rather than being very flat, and they're quite physical. But Pourchaire, I think he qualified somewhere in the 20s. There's 27 cars on the grid. But he progressed in the race to finish 11th, which was an excellent job on debut. Like, that's no mean feat. And I think he really enjoyed the car. As we'll say, he kind of caught the IndyCar bug, is what a lot of people have been saying. So I think the issue looking for the rest of the season is that Pourchaire has a few races which clash with his Super Formula commitments. Ilott also has some races that clash with his World Endurance Championship commitments. One of the things on Pourchaire's side is, in IndyCar they race on ovals. That requires a lot of different kind of test programs. He's not done any of that yet, so they would have to put him through that if they wanted him to kind of be in the car. They'll have to negotiate kind of getting Ilott or Pourchaire out of various contracts if they are to opt for just one of them full time, or they could just chop and change between the two for the rest of the year, which could still be feasible. I think it's still better than just going race by race and not knowing what's happening race by race. Is Malukas going to be fit? Is he not? So yeah, it's unclear. I think Pourchaire seems, he's loving IndyCar so far. We've had a couple of kind of media availabilities with him, and you can't wipe the smile off his face. He's a very kind of passionate guy, and you can tell he's loving it. So yeah, Pourchaire is a definite option. Ilott has a couple of years' experience in IndyCar, so he's also an option. So it remains to be seen, but they're the two I would say after the team have really kind of put effort into having them in the car. Ilott did a few tests with them as well in Malukas' absence. So yeah, remains to be seen, but they're the two.
And do you think McLaren would prefer to have one driver sort of the whole way through the field? Because I'm just thinking, obviously their team, Pato O'Ward's sort of the star of the team, isn't he? He's been there a good few years now. Again, a name not too dissimilar to F1 fans. He's done a few F1 tests. Alexander Rossi as well. I think they got him last year. Is that right? He sort of joined the team last year.
They got Rossi last year. Yes.
Yeah. So obviously another big name. So do you think they'd be okay sort of changing and chopping that thing, or do you think they'd rather have one driver in it every week?
It's really difficult. I think in an ideal world, you'd probably want the certainty of just having one driver kind of build chemistry with the team, just try and build some consistency. It doesn't benefit anyone if you're having to, change the car setup to suit a certain driver's style, or even just things such as keep changing the seat in and out, because we're in a phase of the IndyCar season now where the turnaround between races is fairly short. I mean, they've got the Indy 500 coming up. That's a race that a lot of people, maybe even in the F1 world, will know, part of the Triple Crown in motorsport. And Ilott will most probably, I would imagine, be in the car for that, simply because he's had oval experience. He finished 12th in the Indy 500 last year with a team that, are pretty new to IndyCar, not a major team by any stretch of the imagination. So they'll kind of, I guess, want to get May out of the way, where we've got the race on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway road course, which Ilott is not available for, so Pourchaire will probably be in the car for that. Then, because Pourchaire hasn't done anything on ovals, Ilott will probably be in for the Indy 500. Then beyond that, yeah, I think in an ideal world, you would want one driver, really, but it's just complicated given Pourchaire has Super Formula commitments, Ilott has WEC commitments, so it's going to be logistically tough, but I think they would probably want one. But next year, there could be a couple of vacancies at McLaren. Rossi, I don't think, has a contract beyond this year, so it could be looking next year they go for both Pourchaire and Ilott, and maybe this year's just like an extended sort of test of the pair of them.
Mm-hmm. While we've got you, let's have a quick look at McLaren as a whole in IndyCar. Easy for me to say. Pato O'Ward, like I mentioned, is in sixth at the moment. Like as far as I've seen the last 2 years, he's sort of a driver that's been in and around the top spots, but never really got up to the championship. We're sort of fighting with Alex Palou last year. What do you make of McLaren this year in general? Do you think they're competitive enough to sort of challenge the top spots? I mean, he did, of course, get that odd win about 6 weeks later. If you want to explain a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so I mean, he hadn't won since mid 2022. They hadn't won as a team since then, and that was O'Ward. He won on the short oval at Iowa Speedway. Yeah, he finished second to Joseph Newgarden in the opening race of this season in St. Pete. But it's since transpired that Team Penske, who Joseph Newgarden, the winner, drives for, had violated push-to-pass rules, which is basically IndyCar's overtake equivalent. So a bit like, you have ER. It's different technically, but it's like the ERS. It's the same sort of thing as they have in F1. They'd violated that by basically making it available on starts and restarts. So it's a bit like an F1 with DRS. It's not available until a certain amount of laps in. So they basically made it so their drivers could use it. I won't get into the depths of it. It could be cheating. It couldn't be cheating. It might be an accident. It might not. We don't know. Nobody knows but the team. But yeah, they basically, Newgarden used that to gain an advantage on a restart when he shouldn't have done. So 6 weeks later, they found this. They stumbled upon it during the race weekend at Long Beach, figured out that Penske had kind of basically tampered with this. They said it was a mistake. They'd accidentally copied some code in after a hybrid test. But basically, Newgarden lost his win when they found out 6 weeks later. O'Ward, without leading a lap, inherited the win. So on the face of it, you think, okay, he finished second in that race on the track. He's now got the win from that race. It started pretty well for them. However, since it has not been particularly smooth going for them, Long Beach was a bit messy. O'Ward didn't qualify well, then ran right into the back of his teammate Alexander Rossi, gave him a puncture. O'Ward got a drive-through penalty. They were both kind of on a recovery trail from there. Rossi recovered quite well. I think O'Ward finished something like 16th in the end. So yeah, that wasn't particularly great. And then the last weekend at Barber Motorsports Park was another level of disaster. Quite ironically, Zach Brown, I think, had come out with comments the week before saying, IndyCar could benefit from maybe having a smaller grid, maybe F1 size, because no one really cares about the battles at the back. And then their best car was finished in 22nd of the 27 runners, which was Pourchaire. O'Ward had a bit of a disaster. He spun on the second lap after misjudging a braking zone. He then spun Pietro Fittipaldi, another name that F1 fans will know. That got him a drive-through penalty early on in the race, same as Long Beach. And then at the very end, the cardinal sin, he ran into Théo Pourchaire and spun him, his teammate, again. So back-to-back weekends with teammate contact. And all the while, Rossi had a wheel fall off after a pit stop error. So it was a disaster for them. O'Ward 23rd, Rossi was 25th, I think. It was a disaster.
Yeah, that does sound like a very much big disaster. Perhaps changing fortunes from their current F1 team, which is doing all right. Yeah, that's been absolutely fascinating. Actually, huge thanks for giving your time. That's been really eye-opening, both for me and the listener, hopefully, because I presume they'll not as clued up as you. But yeah, thanks hugely again. I'm sure we'll get you on at some more points of the season if McLaren decide to sack any more drivers, but we'll see about that in the future.
Thank you very much. No, it's been really enjoyable, and yeah, hopefully I've cleared up a few things for people who maybe don't know as much about the intricacies of IndyCar. So yeah, thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
You definitely have. Yeah, thanks again. So that brings an end to today's show. My thanks again go to Jasmine, Cameron and Archie for all joining me today, and my thanks go to you as well for listening along. You can follow us on all social platforms at Pondering Papaya, and make sure you're subscribed on your favourite podcast app. But in the meantime, thanks again for listening and enjoy the race.